Pay close attention. The news you're about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, in the news this week, Katan, we're mainly going to talk about Venezuela and how the U.S. sanctions are targeting Venezuela's oil production, which of course is their main source of income for the country. We'll talk about that and how it's affecting the people there as well. But then also, still regarding Venezuela, some of the ties that they have to other countries, namely Iran and China, and how the U.S. now wants to stop that those mutual ties back and forth there as they try to isolate Venezuela. But first, we're going to talk a little bit more about the petrodollar. Now, we've covered some of the events in the history that led up to the making of the petrodollar, but we have some more details on why it was created and how it has impacted the entire globe. Take a look at this video.
The simple definition of a petrodollar is the revenue from oil in mainly Middle Eastern countries, a revenue that is denominated in US dollars, not the currency of the countries where the oil comes from. All those nations that export their oil must sell it in dollars, so if the dollar loses value, so does their oil. But countries also peg their real currency to the dollar. That means fixing their currency with the dollar. So if the dollar fluctuates, so does their currency. If the dollar value lowers, so do the goods and services of that country. This ensures those countries don't experience wild swings in inflation or deflation. So what exactly is the relation between petrodollars and real dollars? How petrodollars affect the US dollar? We're told that the beginnings of this petrodollar system was in 1944 at the Bretton Woods Conference. This conference was one of the big events of the 20th century because it's when it was agreed that the new global currency would be the US dollar. America would be the only country that could print this currency. This is when we saw the formation of both the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. As always, the website The Balance gives a very detailed account of what this would mean. The Balance explains if a country's currency value became too weak relative to the dollar, the bank would buy up its currency in foreign exchange markets. That would lower the currency's supply and raise its price. If the currency became too high, the bank would print more. That would increase the supply and lower its price. 43 countries signed up in an effort to rebuild the world after a devastating world war and to cooperate better with each other in terms of trade. The Bretton Woods website tells us it was felt by the leaders of the Allied countries, particularly the US and Britain, that a multilateral framework was needed to overcome the destabilizing effects of the previous global economic depression and trade battles. It ended anyway in 1971, when the US suffered what is called stagflation, and that means a combination of inflation and recession. This had a negative effect on nations that belong to what is called the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. Most of the member countries are in the Middle East, with others being in Central America and Africa. Then in 1979, we got something called the U.S.-Saudi Arabian Joint Commission on Economic Cooperation. In that agreement, Saudi Arabia agreed to use American dollars for their oil transactions. These dollars would get back into America through contractors, and so they were what are called recycled petrodollars. This deal with Saudi Arabia was the start of this petrodollar. Was this good for the US? Investopedia tells us the petrodollar system elevated the US dollar to the world's reserve currency, and through this status, the United States enjoys persistent trade deficits and is a global economic hegemony. We all know that in the world, the most in-demand resource is oil. It makes oil-rich countries very wealthy, and it's priced in dollars that makes the USA's currency the most dominant currency in the world. Some say this gives the USA something called exorbitant privilege, which means, according to Investopedia, the USA can perpetually finance its current account deficit by issuing dollar-denominated assets at very low rates of interest, as well as becoming a global economic hegemony. The USA can just print its own money, which is nice for the USA, as it can pay off its massive debt with that money. Imagine you were broke, but could just borrow and then just go to the money tree in the garden to pay off the debt. There are many critics of this system, with one economist writing, "The amount of debt, leverage, deceit, corruption, and fraud in the economic markets, financial system, and in the energy industry are off the charts." Another bonus for the USA is that it can just buy its oil with its own products, which might mean massive construction contracts, expensive military planes, or technologically advanced tanks. Saying that, as we write this, Bloomberg is saying the dollar as reserve currency might be coming to an end, and the days of exorbitant privilege are fast running out. Why is that? We'll let Bloomberg explain. With the current U.S. administration policies of unilateralism, trade wars, and sanctions increasingly affecting both friends and foes, the question arises whether the rest of the world should diversify away from the risks of the U.S. dollar and dollar-centric finance. In 2017, Reuters told us that the power of the petrodollar was already waning. Back in the day, when the USA was busy spending big on oil and petrodollars were going into oil-rich nations and being recycled back out, all was good. But these days, according to that report, not as much of the money is coming back out. These countries are shoring up finances and safeguarding stability at home, said Reuters. Where all the oil money goes, said that report, is hard to say. But a good chunk of it ends up in offshore financial centers, such as the UK, the Cayman Islands, Ireland, Switzerland, Belgium, and Luxembourg. Reuters isn't alone. Another journalist wrote this: "The United States' ability to maintain its influence over the rest of the world has been slowly diminishing. The USA's dollar monopoly, we are told, might be coming to an end. One of the reasons is that mass consumers of oil, China as well as Russia, have been setting up deals with oil-rich countries, and nope, they are not doing these deals in the US dollar." The article says as the tide continues to turn against the petrodollar, eventually even our allies will start to question what best serves their own interests. Forbes writes that there will likely be something called the petro-yuan, but that doesn't mean that the yuan will become the reserve global currency, although some critics say China is writing off the dollar and, along with Russia, is buying lots of gold. These critics tell us that those countries believe the dollar is about to inflate.
It kind of makes you put a little bit of a different view on the American dollar. Well, without any fanfare, the United States hit President Nicolas Maduro's government with yet another blow. This time it was to restrict other countries from selling Venezuela an important ingredient it needs for processing crude oil. Now, the new restriction was quietly posted to the U.S. Treasury Department's website.
Well, Venezuela oil is very viscous or thick black crude that requires hydrocarbons known as diluents or fillers, which are used to reduce the viscosity of the oil when blended, making it easier to transport. Now, the U.S. itself used to be the main exporter of these diluents, but in the beginning of 2019, they cut off exporting to Venezuela. So Maduro's government sought other countries to import these petrochemicals, like Russia. Now the U.S. is putting their foot down and saying they will slap sanctions on anyone who sells these additives to Venezuela, again, targeting their oil production.
Well, investigative journalist for Russia Today, Ben Swan, said in an interview, the goal of the U.S. government is to, quote, eradicate to the best of our, referring to the United States' ability, Venezuela's entire oil economy. It is their primary source of revenue. It is the primary stabilizer in their economy, and the U.S. is doing every single thing in its power to essentially eliminate the oil industry in Venezuela, he said.
Well, Mr. Swan said that the U.S. will continue to, quote, squeeze Venezuela in an economic vice, unquote, until Maduro and his government give up. Now, if that doesn't take place, the White House is hoping that either the military or the people of Venezuela themselves will revolt against President Maduro and oust him from power. Now, there is no way of knowing how long this could take or if Venezuela will find another way around the newest sanctions. The U.S., however, will continue to apply economic pressure indefinitely because time is on their side.
Well, what isn't being reported by most news media, though, is the suffering that the Venezuelans are enduring because of the economic pressure put on their country. So far, it's being portrayed that Maduro is to blame for what his people are experiencing, struggling to survive. And while his administration has made some terrible economic decisions, it is the U.S. who is really crippling the country's economy, causing suffering for millions of Venezuelans.
Well, just in the last month, oil exports in Venezuela have dropped. Oil exports have dropped by 17%, and the U.S. has indicated they plan to put further economic sanctions in place in the weeks to come. Now, according to Ben Swan, that is the goal. The goal, he says, is to make it so impossible to live there, to punish the people enough, to squeeze the people in that vice enough that they overthrow the government. So, you see the U.S. here, like Mr. Swan said, they want to really, the goal is to hurt the people so that they themselves overthrow the government. Right. So, but, sad because the people, those that are really not involved in the skirmish, they're the ones that have to suffer the most.
That's right. And they're basically just trying to make a living, but of course, as a result of the tough economic sanctions placed on the country, it's making it hard just for people to get by on a daily basis. Well, Mike Pompeo recently went to Sochi, Russia, and expressed the United States' desire for Russia to cease its support of Maduro. He said also, despite our political disagreements, I hope we keep talking and find a way forward that ends in a solution to the humanitarian crisis that we can both agree.
Well, Iran and Venezuela have had decades of close relationships, and many speculate that Hezbollah has several cells operating in Venezuela. Now, reports of Hezbollah activity on the ground is drawing the attention not only of the U.S., but also international analyst Emmanuel Ottolenghi, a senior fellow with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, said that Venezuela remains an important strategic asset for Iran and gives Iran the important entry point into the Western Hemisphere.
Well, Iran and Hezbollah have set up an infrastructure in that country for many years, and Iran is not about to let it go in the hands of pro-Western, pro-American governments.
Well, China in Venezuela has had strong relationships over the past few years. China has been supplying Venezuela with financial assistance, infrastructure, and even automobile parts and manufacturing. And Venezuela has been supplying China with oil. Now, Venezuela is one of the world's biggest producers of oil, so Venezuela has been depending on China for financial support. Now, currently, over 500,000 people of Chinese descent live in Venezuela, and there's been immigration between the countries for over 150 years.
Over the past decade, the relationship has changed, and of course, several high-profile visits, including one from President Xi in 2014, brought with it several $1 billion in loans in return for oil. Since 2007, China has loaned Venezuela over $50 billion, which is almost half of its investment for the South Americas. And the agreement is a perfect match for the two countries, as this, of course, China consumes over 12% of global oil consumption, and Venezuela has over 25% or a quarter of the world's global oil reserves. So for the two countries and what Venezuela is going through right now with sanctions from the United States, this is kind of a lifeline in the middle of the ocean for them.
Well, China has invested in infrastructure made in China taxis and other financial incentives. Now, that, of course, is a great help to Venezuela since oil production has slowed as well as dropped in oil prices. Now, a great majority of Venezuela's external debt has been paid with loans from China, so many are wondering if China will still continue to loan more money to Venezuela, who is also heavily invested in Venezuela and has a stake in its economic stability.
Well, nuclear weapons are a real threat on the horizon, and many are fearful that we might see another terrible day, such as the one that was seen in the 40s with Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But of course, just how bad are nuclear weapons in their aftermath? Well, take a look at this next video from an accounting of an eyewitness who actually saw some of these nuclear tests taking place, but he's also been studying nuclear explosions, atomic explosions for many, many years now. Let's take a look.
Miles back, observers from all services and several allied nations stand by for the first daylight tower shot.
The terrible, swift power of nuclear weapons has to be seen to be believed.
This is a really big fireball. It'll be about 2 miles across.
Now, thanks to a project headed by Greg Spriggs at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in California, the public can see them as never before.
It's unclassified. It's not a threat to national security.
Starting in 1945, the U.S. conducted 210 nuclear tests above ground, all of them recorded on film from as many angles as possible.
I now declare that the United States does not propose to conduct nuclear tests in the atmosphere so long as other states do not do so.
That ended in 1963 when, for the good of the planet, the U.S. and the Soviet Union agreed to stop testing in the atmosphere.
Let's play this in fast motion, and you can see that mock stem crawling up.
Unlike most of us, Spriggs understands the physics that produces these spectacular images.
Temperatures can reach anywhere from about 10 million degrees up to about 15 million degrees initially. Degrees Kelvin, very hot, very hot.
At the outer edge of the fireball is a shock wave. What the fireball doesn't vaporize, the shock wave crushes. See those tiny objects in the foreground? Those are tanks about to be hit by the shock wave.
When it first starts off, it's moving at Mach 100 times the speed of sound.
And then there is the mushroom-shaped cloud which climbs into the sky, spewing radiation.
That's directly tied to the nuclear fallout, which was very, very sensitive to the cloud height.
Using a computer to measure the cloud from one blast, Spriggs discovered the original calculations made 50 years ago were off by a full mile.
Instead of 35,000 feet, it was something like 40,000 feet, and it was because of the way they measured it.
That made him wonder if calculations from all the other blasts were wrong as well. It was more than just academic curiosity. Those calculations are used to predict the performance, what Spriggs calls the yield, of today's weapons.
If you measure the shockwave radius and you're off by 1%, you will be off by 5% in the yield. Here, we're able to analyze all the fireball films in an automated way.
Digital technology allowed Spriggs to analyze the films with much greater precision.
Those are high-energy X-rays running down the cable and vaporizing the cable.
And he found that the measurements made decades ago over the Pacific Ocean and Nevada desert were inaccurate.
The best they could do in the 50s was on the order about plus or minus 7, maybe 10%. So we're talking maybe plus or minus 100 kilotons for a 1 megaton shot.
A kiloton is an explosion equivalent to 1,000 tons of TNT. 100 kilotons is about 6 times bigger than the bomb which leveled Hiroshima, killing a third of the population. The Pentagon would not tell us if the new data from the old tests had forced any change in current nuclear targeting plans. But that does not change the impact of simply looking at images like this. Frozen for 1/1,000,000th of a second from 2 miles away, this fireball truly looks like an alien come to devour the Earth.
What do you hope the public gets out of watching
I hope they
these?
appreciate just how horrific these weapons are. This is something that can kill millions of people in the blink of an eye. How horrific these weapons are. This is something that can kill millions of people in the blink of an eye. How horrific these weapons are. This is something that can kill millions of people in the blink of an eye.
Spriggs is one of the few nuclear weapons designers old enough to have actually witnessed a nuclear explosion.
The 1962 weapon effects testing, Operation Fishbowl.
A high-altitude nighttime blast over the Pacific.
The sky lit up like it was noon. No matter what direction you were looking, it just lit up. And it took about 15 minutes for all the colors to fade away.
How does the real thing then compare with the film?
It's amazing the difference between what occurred out there and what's on the film.
As majestic and fearsome as those photos appear, they don't come close.
Not even close to what you see in real life.
Very interesting. One of the points I thought was important to note was the fact that they underestimated just how powerful these nuclear weapons were. I mean, now that they can actually use the technology and examine the blasts and so forth, they're realizing that they underestimated the magnitude of the force. So to see how powerful already nuclear weapons are and then realize that, okay, that was even understated, That's really makes you, hope that these weapons would never be used. But of course, we know that prophecy, Yusra Hawkins says otherwise.
Yeah, and the aftermath is going to be greater destruction. I think mankind is going to realize, once these bombs are used, because everyone, the analysts and everyone says that, it's not a matter of if, but when, these weapons are used, as we can see the fingers being itched, on the triggers as countries are going head to head with different conflicts. It's going to be much greater than they probably ever expected. But at that point, there won't be any going back to fix it. You can't unpress the button that launches a nuclear weapon. And really what all countries need, all leaders need, is to grasp hold of a true peaceful solution that both parties can agree on, that benefits not only the leaders in their country, but their people as a whole. Because as we mentioned before, in looking at Venezuela and with the sanctions, the economic pressure the United States is putting on Maduro and his regime, it's really the people that are suffering as a result of it. But with a peaceful solution, these things can be avoided. Everybody can have what they need, peace and joy, and life would just be that much better without the threat of war looming over. And if you'd like to learn more about a peaceful solution and what you can do for your family, you can always contact the House of Yahweh. And when you do, don't forget to request your free copies of the monthly newsletter and the Prophetic Word magazine. Here's how.
Well, to contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites, Yahweh.com, YusraHawkins.com, or Yahweh'sBranch.com. You can also visit our website by going to YPNnews.com. If you would like to email the House of Yahweh, you can do so by emailing info@Yahweh.com. If you're calling internationally, you can call the number that's on your screen. And if you still have not yet checked out 2 Bible help study tools on the market, they're absolutely free. You can do so by going to YisraelSays.com and AskYisrael.com. You'll find a search bar. You can type in any scriptural topic, and you'll see uploaded there page after page of quotes, sites where you can check out the information guaranteed to further your understanding.
Well, stay with us. Don't go anywhere. Get your Holy Scriptures, some paper, and something to write with, because up next is Yusra Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.